You remember the silence before the signal. For generations we had listened to the static dark. We had aimed our dishes at every promising star. We waited for a sign, a pattern, a whisper of another mind. We imagined a greeting of peace and shared wonder. We expected complex math or a map of alien stars. What we got was a scream. You were there at the listening post that day. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee and ozone. The signal arrived without warning, a sudden spike on every monitor. It was not elegant or structured. It was raw data, a frantic burst of information. It was the digital ghost of a dying world. It was not a message for us. We were never the intended audience. We had simply overheard a final, desperate plea. The message was a warning to others, to anyone who could hear. It told of shadows that moved between the stars. It spoke of fleets that blotted out suns. It begged for help against an enemy that knew no treaty, an enemy that knew no mercy. Our first contact with the wider galaxy was not a handshake. It was a funeral dirge for a people we would never meet. The silence that followed was heavier than before. It was filled with the knowledge that we were not alone, and that we were terribly, terribly vulnerable. The universe was not empty. It was hunted. We learned of the crawl that day. The name was buried in the panicked data stream. It was spoken with a terror that needed no translation. Our best minds worked for weeks to decipher the message. They pieced together fragments of a lost language. They reconstructed the history of a fallen civilization. They built a portrait of our new neighbors. The Crawl were an empire of conquest. They did not build. They consumed. Their worlds were vast fortresses and shipyards. Their people were bred for a single purpose: war. They swept through star systems like a plague. They left behind only silent worlds and orbiting debris. Their empire was a scar of dead light across the galaxy. It was built on the ash of countless worlds and the fear of those that remained. We mapped their territory from the data we held. It was a sprawling, aggressive stain on the star charts. Humanity's small bubble of space was directly in their path. Not next week, not next year, but soon. All our projections showed the same outcome. The Crawl expansion was a predictable wave of destruction, and it was coming for us. We had finally met our galactic peers, and they carried the biggest stick in the playground. Our fleets were specks against their might. We held emergency sessions of the Global Council. Our greatest military minds presented their plans. They spoke of rapid shipbuilding, of new weapon systems. They showed simulations of our best ships against a single Crawl destroyer. Our ships lost every single time. They were bigger, faster, stronger. The math was simple and brutal. We could not win a fight. Some argued for a silent retreat. We could power down our world, become a ghost planet. We could hope their sensors would pass us by. But we knew that was a temporary solution, a lie we would tell our children. Sooner or later, they would find us. Despair began to settle into the halls of power. It felt like an ending, like a story told for nothing. Then came the desperate gamble. It was not proposed by a general or a strategist. It was suggested by a poet, a historian. She argued we were looking at the problem backwards. We were trying to match their strength, their brutality. She said we should fight with our own weapon, a weapon not of steel, but of spirit. Most of the council thought she was insane, but a few listened, a few desperate enough to try anything. Our first ships carried no torpedoes. They held no railguns or plasma cannons. Their cargo bays were filled with our memories, our dreams. We called them the Culture Arc Fleet. They were small, unmanned probes pushed by simple solar sails. They were slow and completely defenseless. Each one was a time capsule, a message in a bottle, thrown into the vast, dark ocean of space. They broadcast our symphonies. Beethoven's Ninth echoed into the void. They transmitted our stories. The words of Shakespeare and Morrison painted pictures of our souls. They carried our films, our paintings, our sciences. They showed our triumphs and our failures, our capacity for great love and for great sorrow. They carried the messy, beautiful, contradictory truth of humanity. We aimed them at the heart of the Krull Empire. It was a salvo of art fired against an armada of steel. Some called it the height of foolishness, a joke in the face of our own extinction. We were sending poetry to conquer a monster. It was the most human thing we had ever done. It was a declaration that we existed, and this is what we were. Even if our time was short. The Krull patrols did not know how to react. Their forward scouts were the first to encounter our arcs. You can picture the scene on a Krull bridge, all sharp angles and cold, red light. A hulking commander, Kalen Grohl, staring at his view screen. His sensors would have screamed with alarms. An unknown vessel approaching his battle group. He would have ordered shields raised, weapons charged, the standard protocol for any unidentified contact. But his weapons officer would have reported the impossible. The target was unarmed. It had no shields, no drives of military grade. It was a flimsy piece of metal and silicon. It was drifting towards them like cosmic dust. Kalen Grohl would have been suspicious. He would have seen it as a trick, a new kind of mine. He would have ordered a full-spectrum scan. Find the trap. Find the weapon. Then the broadcast would have hit his ship, not a burst of static or a tactical code, but the clear, powerful sound of a human piano. A simple melody from a composer named Chopin. Imagine the confusion on that bridge. The harsh grunts of the Krull language falling silent. The crew frozen at their stations, listening. They met our transmissions with a wall of confused silence. They were warriors prepared for anything except for this. Our data was a virus in their networks. The Krull took our arcs apart piece by piece. They downloaded every byte of information we had sent. Their best intelligence analysts were put on the case. They were tasked with finding the true purpose of our message. They searched for hidden weapons code. They looked for subliminal military commands. They assumed it was the most complex propaganda ever devised. They were right, and they were wrong. The weapon was not hidden in the data. The weapon was the data. A Krull technician, sitting in a sterile lab, would load a file. He expected troop deployments or star charts. Instead, he saw a recording of a ballet. He saw dancers moving with a grace his people had never known. He saw performers creating something beautiful for no reason. For nothing but the art itself. The ideas spread through their secured networks. A Krull warrior watched a human movie about a family. He saw parents teaching a child to ride a bicycle. He saw arguments and forgiveness. It showed him a universe beyond conquest. A life measured in moments, not in victories. Their culture had no concept of a life without duty. No concept of a goal that was not dominance. Our art was a plague of new ideas, and it was highly contagious. Whispers started in the dark corners of Krull warships, in the mess halls and the engine rooms. Warriors would gather around a shared data pad. They would listen to our folk songs. They would watch our comedies. At first, it was a curiosity, a look at a bizarre, primitive species. They laughed at our strange customs, but the laughter was a new sound in those metal halls. a sound not born of mockery or cruelty. They began to question their purpose. A young pilot, after watching a documentary on our oceans, might look at the starfields. He would see the nebulae not as tactical obstacles, but as something else. He had no word for it. His language, so rich with terms for combat and strategy, lacked a word for beautiful. They had to invent one. They stole the word from one of our poems. The questions became bolder. Why do we fight? What happens after the final victory? What is the purpose of a life spent only taking? These were dangerous thoughts in the Krull Empire. They were seeds of dissent planted by our music and our stories. They saw beauty in our art, and it was a concept that threatened to unravel their entire civilization. A concept more dangerous than any weapon. The Elder Ones of the galaxy sent us a message. They were the ancient star nations, the firstborn. They had watched empires rise and fall for millions of years. Their technology was like magic to us. They had observed the Krull for eons. They contained them, managed them, treated them like a caged animal. Our cultural offensive had set off alarms across their silent networks. Their message was not a request, it was a command. They told us to stop. An ambassador of light and energy appeared before our global council. It had no real voice, but its thoughts pressed into our minds. It showed us visions of galactic history. It showed us empires that collapsed into chaotic civil wars. It showed us how a sudden change in a society could create a monster, a power vacuum that something far worse could fill. They said we were playing with a fire they could not control. They called our strategy reckless, unpredictable. They accused us of cultural vandalism on a galactic scale. They feared what a liberated Krull might become. A broken people with the galaxy's most powerful warships. They demanded we cease all broadcasts immediately. They promised to protect us from the Krull if we obeyed. Their protection felt like a threat. We refused their demand. We held a global vote. For the first time in history, every single human being participated. The choice was simple. Do we trust the ancient, cynical powers? Or do we trust in ourselves, in our own messy humanity? The vote was nearly unanimous. We would continue. We sent a polite but firm message back to the Elder Ones. We told them their cage had failed. We would try to open the door. Then we sent more. We didn't just send probes this time. We converted entire colony ships into mobile broadcast stations. We launched a cultural offensive on a scale never seen before. We flooded their worlds with our philosophies. We sent the teachings of Plato and the wisdom of the Buddha. We sent our debates on freedom, on justice, on the meaning of life. We showed them our compassion. We sent thousands of hours of footage. Doctors healing the sick. Volunteers rebuilding after disasters. Simple acts of kindness between strangers. We did not hide our flaws. We also sent our history of war, of cruelty, of failure. We showed them who we were, all of it. We gave them the tools to judge us, and to judge themselves. It was the ultimate act of faith. The first to break was a warlord named Kalen Vor. His name was a legend in the Krull Empire. He was known for his brutality, his ruthless efficiency. He had personally overseen the subjugation of a dozen star systems. His fleet, the 13th Scourge, was the Emperor's personal hammer. When he moved his ships, worlds trembled. And then he stopped. His fleet was poised to strike a rebellious mining colony. The attack was imminent. Then a message came from his flagship. It was not sent to Krull High Command. It was broadcast on an open channel, directly to Earth. You remember hearing it. The guttural, harsh voice of the Krull language. followed by a crude computer translation. The words were shocking. He was surrendering his entire fleet. Unconditionally. He did not seek power or political asylum. He was not defecting to our side in a war. He asked for something far stranger. He said he had listened to our stories for months. He had heard the tales of heroes and lovers, of poets and peasants. He wanted to understand the minds that created them. He did not ask for a general. He asked for a poet to be sent to his ship to teach his crew. His choice started a revolution of thought. The news of Kalen, Vor's defection, spread like wildfire. The Kral High Command tried to suppress it. They declared him a traitor, a madman. They sent a fleet to destroy him. But the fleet they sent refused to fire. Its own commander had been secretly listening to our music. He turned his ships around and joined Kalen, Vor's growing armada of peace. The empire began to unravel from within. It was not a violent collapse. There were no civil wars, no bloody coups. It was a quiet and peaceful disintegration. Planetary governors simply stopped taking orders from the capital. They declared their worlds independent cultural protectorates. Fleets abandoned their patrols. They set their courses for Earth, not as invaders, but as pilgrims. It was a revolution of ideas. A society built on a single pillar, conquest, had found that pillar removed, and the entire structure simply came apart. The rigid chain of command broke link by link. Warriors laid down their weapons not in surrender, but in curiosity. They wanted to learn how to paint. They wanted to learn how to write a song. The great Kral Empire was dying. It was being replaced by 1,000 nascent civilizations. Then came the last great war fleet. The Kral Emperor, isolated and enraged on his throne world, gathered his final loyalists, the Imperial Guard, the most fanatical, most disciplined warriors in the galaxy. He sent them on one last mission, a mission of pure vengeance, to destroy the source of the infection, to burn Earth to the ground. Their silent armada arrived in our solar system without warning. Hundreds of jagged black warships filled our skies. They were colossal, each one a city of death. They dwarfed our own orbital defenses. If they had fired, it would have been over in seconds. The planet held its breath. There were no defiant speeches from our leaders. There was no scramble of fighter craft. What could we do? We had thrown our last stone, so we did the only thing we had left to do. We broadcast one last time, not to their ships, but from our world. We arranged every orchestra, every choir on the planet, and together we played a new piece of music, composed in the shadow of their fleet. It was a song of immense sorrow, for the victims of the Kral, and a song of soaring hope, for the future of all people. Their weapon ports remained closed. Their crews were listening to our music. The Kral did not die, they were reborn. The silent armada never fired a shot. After 3 days of listening, they sent a single message. We understand. Then they turned their fleet around and went home. Not to resume an empire, but to begin a new age. The emperor was deposed, not with violence, but with a vote of no confidence from his own guards. He was given a small moon to live out his days in quiet retirement. Some say he took up gardening. Their worlds of war became worlds of art. The change was slow and often clumsy. Great weapon forges were retrofitted into sculpture studios. Military parade grounds were turned into open-air theaters. Warriors who had only known how to handle a rifle now struggled to hold a paintbrush. Their first creations were crude, derivative of our own art, but they were filled with a raw, powerful passion. They were fascinated by our flaws, our emotions. Their first attempts at romantic comedies were a little direct, but they were trying. They were learning to be something new. Their worlds, once gray and uniform, exploded with color and sound. The Krawl were gone. In their place stood a new people. The Kir-Ana. It meant the listeners in their newly evolving language. A new renaissance had begun. The elder council watched in terrified awe. Their ambassadors returned to Earth. They no longer carried an air of ancient superiority. They were humbled and visibly shaken. They had maintained the galactic order for millions of years. They used threats, quarantines, and surgical military strikes. They managed the galaxy like a cold, uncaring machine. We had broken their machine with a love song. They had seen the Krawl as an unchangeable law of nature, a destructive force to be contained, not redeemed. We had defeated an empire without shedding a single drop of blood. We had not destroyed our enemy. We had made them our friend. This was a form of power they had never conceived of. It did not operate on principles of physics or energy. It operated on principles of empathy and ideas. They looked at us differently now. We were no longer the loud, primitive upstarts. We were something new, something unpredictable. They had fleets that could crack planets. We had a weapon that could crack cultures. A weapon that could dismantle an empire from the inside out without firing a shot. They were not sure which was more frightening. Their awe was mixed with a deep, unsettling fear. Now the galaxy knows our name, and it knows our method. The story of the Krawl and of Earth spread from star to star. We are no longer the quiet newcomers hiding in our little corner of space. We are a major power, not because of our warships or our technology, but because of our ideas, because of the weapon we unleashed without ever meaning to. Other militaristic empires now watch us with suspicion. They build firewalls not just for their networks, but for their cultures. They fear our broadcasts more than our battleships. A human ship entering their space is met with a complete communications blackout. They are afraid to listen. They are terrified that their own soldiers might hear a song, that they might see a story that makes them question. We are humanity, the ones who kill with kindness. We brought peace to a violent quadrant of the galaxy. We ended a reign of terror that lasted for centuries. We did it without conquest, without violence. But we also erased a culture. We overrode a civilization's identity with our own. We are the architects of the Great Quiet. And the galaxy is not sure if it should thank us or fear us. We brought them peace. But what was the cost?